Alright guys, welcome back to another video in the leather backpack project. So in this one, we're going to actually start putting all of our pieces together, because in the last one, we got all of our pieces cut out, shaped, all that kind of stuff. Now it's time to start putting some of these pieces together and creating the actual shape or form of our backpack, which is super exciting. So we're going to have a lot of work to do, so we're just going to jump straight into it, and I will see you guys back in a little bit. Alright, so I kind of got in the zone there and just kind of went through and did a bunch of different work to kind of get ourselves a little bit more further ahead than where I was. So we've got all of our straps ready to go now. We've got them all finished up. They're looking really good. Everything from the inside to the outside of these is all ready to be actually mounted on the bag. So they're looking really good. Those I'm actually very happy that I went with black, because I think it complements the rest of the bag really nicely. On our back panel, I've got the mounting point for all of our straps stitched on. We glued it and then we stitched it. So the last thing we're gonna have to do is pass through our rivet holes. When we actually go to do it through and do our straps, we'll then put our rivets in and we'll have a very strong connection point there. So that part's done. Then on our bottom piece, we've got our lash tabs already stitched on. These again looking really good. This is one of those things that I really like seeing when the project starts coming together. You know, kind of getting to see our contrasting pieces coming together, especially getting through some of the stitching too, because I'm not gonna lie, this is a very challenging thing for me about the whole leatherworking thing, is I love the process of working with the leather, cutting out the leather. It's the stitching part that I find to be very, very painful. And the problem with leatherworking is because it's kind of a specialty craft, you can't really get a leather sewing machine at a reasonable price. I think the cheapest one I've seen that's anywhere near decent is about $2,000, which is kind of crazy compared to a lot of the woodworking machinery I have in my shop. But anyway, with saying that, our next stage here is going to be involving a lot more stitching. It should be a little bit easier than what we did before. Having to go around objects is a little bit more annoying. What we're going to have to do now is actually go through and start putting all of our panels together. So we're going to start by taking our top, or our front and our back piece, I should say, and we're going to be going through and skiving all of our inside edges, and then on our top edge, we're going to be folding it over about an inch just to give us a little bit of a nicer finished look to the top, and then we'll be going through and connecting all three of these panels together, just kind of going through on the edges, and we're going to be doing a double stitch on each one of those, so that'll kind of help give a little bit more structure to the bag. Then once we've got all three of those panels connected together, we'll actually start installing our straps and the buckles and all that. I did forget to mention about the buckles. I still have to go through and do some stitching on these just to reinforce them and just kind of for extra looks. So in this last segment of the video here, the goal is going to be just getting all three of our panels stitched together. We're not going to actually fold them and start creating our bag just yet. I just want to get all three of those panels into a nice continuous segment. That way we're kind of ready to go for our last video where we'll actually be putting the whole bag together. So we're about halfway through our stitching now to get this bag together. I've done the top folded over flaps, so this piece and this piece is going to be what actually makes the top of our bag. So they're looking really good. I'm actually very happy with how the stitching came out. It's a lot better than I thought it was going to be. It's got a very nice, clean, refined edge, and the stitching is nice and even all the way through, which is kind of hard to mess up when you have like the punches and all that. But anyway, it looks good. I'm very happy with it. But I will say I learned quite a few things. For one, as soon as I can afford a leather sewing machine, I will definitely get one. Now, the one that I'm looking at is about $4,000, which is a little bit excessive given that that's $1,000 more than my SawStop table saw. It's kind of a hard thing to justify, seeing how I don't want to get that hardcore into leatherworking. But the other thing I learned is actually a little bit more interesting, and that is the shape of the needle. Now, I really can't show it because, again, they're literally needles. They're very small shapes that I'm trying to show on camera. So I'll try to explain it as best as I can. But basically, there's two different types of needles that I have. I don't know if there's more out there. These are just the two that I have. And I didn't notice that these were different until I kind of started paying attention to what I was doing. So on this side here, we've got a needle that has a point to it. So it's got a very obvious point, much like how when you imagine a needle, how it goes to a very sharp point at the end. And you can actually use that to punch through the leather. The other needle I have has kind of a rounded over tip. It still has a point on the end of it, but it's a much rounder point, or a much rounder tip to it. And so what I was finding is that with one of the needles, I would end up trying to go through the punched hole and it would kind of get lost, or it would get stuck in another part of the leather because it would just kind of want to punch its own hole. Whereas when I use the rounded over ones, they would kind of follow through those pre-punched holes that I'd done before, and they just worked a lot better, were a lot smoother. I also found that I didn't stab myself nearly as much with these because they don't really have the power to, puncture skin or puncture my clothing or anything like that. Whereas the ones that have a very sharp point on the end of them, they did stabbed me quite a few times. I've got a lot of little punch holes in that. I even got one where I almost stuck it into my leg because I slipped and then almost made a big accident there. So all around, using these needles that have a little bit more of a rounded tip to them, they work just slightly better than the sharper pointed needles, which kind of goes against my mindset when it comes to stitching or sewing things in general. so we now have very much so what looks like the middle point of having a bag, right? We've got this whole big long piece that spreads out. Our last bit of stitching we're gonna have to do is to flip these pieces inside out, put a stitch up both sides, stitch the bottom, and then we will have an actual bag. But before we can do that, we have to go through, put on our straps, put on our bottom buckles that are gonna attach our straps to the bottom of the bag and give everything a little bit of adjustability. Overall, we are still quite a ways away from having a completed bag, but we are much closer than we were before. Now, one thing I will say again is about the stitching is that as soon as I can possibly afford to get myself a leather sewing machine, I'm going to do it. Now, it is expensive, but I think it'd be well worthwhile because not only is it way faster, you know, doing each of the lines on here took about half an hour. So if we multiply that times 8, that is a lot of time spent just hand stitching just these parts. We still have a whole bunch more to do that I think is actually going to take a lot more time too, trying to do it by hand. So a actual leather sewing machine would be a very handy thing to have around because it would speed things up, but would also prevent a serious amount of pain. My hands right now just covered in blisters. I got a really nasty one right on my pointer finger because that's where you're pulling the thread over. It's just not fun. But I will say that having gotten to this point, even with all the pain that my hands are in, I'm very, very happy with the way this is looking. I think it's super cool to actually be making something out of leather for the first time. You know, something I'm actually going to be able to use fairly consistently because I'm planning to actually start using this bag pretty much on a daily basis. So I'm very, very excited about that. But we're going to get this thing finished off in the next video. So as always, guys, I do hope you enjoyed this one, and I will see you in the next one.